Hey everyone, I'm Tom. Welcome to GenChord. Today, we're diving into how chords are built. It's awesome to have you here. You're about to experience a fresh, visually driven way to understand music theory. With the tool I've developed, you'll get a clear view of the beauty behind how music is structured. Let's get started. This is a basic triad. It's made up of 3 notes. The first one is called the root. If we start with C as the root, then add the 3rd and 5th notes of the C major scale, we get a C major triad. In terms of intervals, the 3rd is a major 3rd above the root, and the 5th is a perfect 5th above it. You can think of an interval like an invisible ruler. It measures how far a note is from the root. Put another way, whether we start on C or D, if we keep the same interval structure, we'll end up with a major triad based on that root. This interval ruler shows relative distances. Once it's set, you can slide it to any root. The first part of a chord name tells you the root, the fixed starting point on the keyboard. The second part explains the chord structure, the relative intervals. You've probably come across a bunch of different chord names. Most of them follow a pretty standard pattern: root note plus some kind of interval shorthand. Now, understanding the root is usually straightforward, but figuring out how all those intervals combine, that can get a little tricky. For beginners, the sheer number of combinations out there can feel overwhelming. When I first started learning, I seriously thought that musicians had invented some kind of secret code just to keep the mysteries of music locked away. To break down these chord symbols, you'll need to understand intervals. If it's been a while, no problem, let's review. An interval is simply the perceived distance between 2 notes, how far apart they sound. Now, on the keyboard, we can actually see this distance. Let's say you start on a note, and you count up to the 4th key. That 4th key is your target note. Each key, white or black, counts as 1 half step. So the number of half steps between 2 notes is what defines the interval. An interval is just a way to compare the space between any 2 notes. Take this example. These 2 notes are 4 half steps apart. We can think of this as using a virtual ruler to measure the distance. Of course, this ruler isn't physical, it's just a way to count half steps. So from an interval perspective, they're all equal. We say they have equal intervals, even though they're in different spots on the keyboard. Now, let's play a game. If I give you 2 notes, can you tell me how many half steps are between them? In just 3 seconds? Most people can't, and it's not because you're not smart. It's because counting half steps like that just isn't practical in real time. There's a better way to think about it. Instead of counting each key, let's give every interval a name. Here's how we do that. We go back to the note C and build a C major scale. Just the white keys in order. Each note in the scale gets a number, its position in the scale. Like number solfege, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Above the keyboard, we can still show the number of half steps from the root. But for now, let's forget about the half step count and just use those scale numbers to represent intervals. Let's forget half step counts for now and just use the scale numbers to represent intervals. Isn't that easier? Way easier, right? So when I say the 3rd from C, I'm not asking you to count 4 half steps. I'm pointing to a specific spot in the major scale. Yes, it's technically 4 half steps, but forget that for now. Focus on the scale position, it's way more intuitive. Now I'll admit it, this scale number system is super intuitive, but it's not super flexible. It only works for the default intervals, like the ones straight out of the major scale. But here's the thing, we don't want to change the meaning of 3rd. 3rd should always refer to that position in the scale. What if we want to show other versions of the 3rd? That's where suffixes come in. We can modify the interval using symbols like a minus sign, a flat, or a lowercase m. They all mean basically the same thing. The interval is a half step smaller. So let's break this down. The default version, the one from the major scale, is called a major third. We write it with a capital M. If we shrink that by a half step, it becomes a minor third. That's a lowercase m. Don't let the names throw you off major and minor here. Just mean different sizes of the same interval shape. And yep, you can go even smaller. Now it's a diminished third, written as D. And some people use prefixes instead of suffixes. That's fine. Wait a second. So based on what we've just learned, the second from C should be a major second, right? Yep, that's correct. C to D is 2 half steps, a major second. Let's say you go to the third and move down 2 half steps. You land on the same note you got from the major second. So exact same distance, but now it has a different name. From the second point of view, we call it a major second. From the third point of view, we call it a diminished third. Same sound, same number of half steps from the root, but different names depending on how we look at it. This is called an harmonic interval. Different names for the same pitch distance. Kind of like calling someone James or Jim, they're both correct, it just depends on context. Let's wrap this up with a quick summary. When we say C's third note, we usually mean a major third by default. C's second note means a major second. This pattern continues. Sixth means major sixth. Seventh means major seventh. The fourth and fifth are special. These are called perfect intervals, written with a P. The rules are different here. But for now, just think of perfect as a label, not a value judgment. Here's a good rule of thumb. Intervals default to perfect for first, fourth, and fifth. Everything else defaults to major. Every interval can be adjusted. If it's major, it can become minor, diminished, or augmented. If it's perfect, it can become diminished or augmented. A major scale has 7 different natural notes, but the logic for interval changes only follows 2 simple rules. Different interval names can describe the same distance from the root note. A major second is 2 half steps. A diminished third is also 2 half steps. Same sound, different label. One is the default version of a note. The other is a modified version of a different note. This isn't just music theory being weird, it actually helps us understand which note was altered to reach the final sound. Let's try it with another note. From the 5th note, that note is an augmented 5th above C, but from the 6th note, it's a minor 6th above C. Same key, different labels. We just used the C natural major scale to derive the names of each interval. Now, let's lock in the number of half steps behind each interval. By shifting these relative positions, we can build other scales. There are 12 in total. I understand that most people are more used to building major scales using the whole half pattern. But this method makes it hard to quickly identify which key corresponds to which scale degree in practice. If there's only one thing I want you to memorize in music, it's the position of each note in every major scale. Yes, at first, it's definitely challenging, but here's the method I recommend. Take the D-flat major scale, for example. Try to remember the overall shape of the scale, how it looks on the keyboard. Visualize it like a picture in your mind. You can even imagine it as an animal or some other shape, it doesn't matter. What matters is this. You should be able to feel where a specific note is in that key. Is it a black key or a white key? If I ask you, where's the 3rd of D-flat major? Where's the 5th, the 7th? You should be able to roughly point them out. Go back to the keyboard and double check. Do it again and again, burn that shape into your mind. This is visual learning, not just theory. Don't focus on note names or solfege. Instead, let your eyes and hands guide you to the right note. Of course, everyone's imagination is different. You can also use lines or shapes to help you remember. Feel free to create your own visual patterns, whatever makes the scale stick in your mind. In my opinion, this process takes time and hands-on practice. Most people learn this way anyway, they just give it a fancy name, like muscle memory, to make it sound mysterious. Since we derived interval names from the major scale, being familiar with major scales helps you quickly identify intervals. Alright, let's answer this question. What's the interval between these two notes? In your mind, the D major scale should flash by. Then, locate the fifth scale degree. Now ask yourself, how far is this note from D? It's 1/2 step higher than a perfect fifth, so we call it an augmented fifth. Alternatively, maybe you first thought of the 6th degree. By default, the 6th is a major 6th. But this note is a 1/2 step lower, so we call it a minor 6th. Now that we've covered the basics, we're ready to confidently start decoding chords. Let's begin with C as the root. We pick out the 1st, 3rd, and the 5th degrees, and that gives us the basic structure of a chord. Then, we extract the intervals between the notes. I know some people prefer to write the letter name first, because it reads more naturally in spoken language. That's totally fine. But here's the real task. We need to name the chord. And naming is all about compressing information. Since the P1 points us to the root, we can just replace that with the letter name of the root, C. So now we've built a chord, and we can call it the C major 3 perfect 5 chord. Let's keep going. If we lower the 3rd by a 1/2 step, we get a different chord. We can name this chord C minor 3 perfect 5. But let's be honest, saying C major 3 perfect 5 and C minor 3 perfect 5 is a bit of a mouthful. We keep only the part that changes the 3rd. That's enough to describe the character of the chord. The perfect 5th, it's the default. Everyone assumes it's there. It's part of the unspoken agreement in music theory. And that's the magic. Music has this mysterious system of shared conventions. To decode more of these musical codes, let's first understand one key concept: possibilities. Possibilities refer to all the possible variations that notes within a chord can take. When we studied intervals earlier, we learned that the third can have 4 different forms: major, minor, diminished, and augmented. So the third has 4 possibilities. The fifth has 3 possibilities: perfect, diminished, and augmented. Keeping the root note fixed, the third has 4 possible variations, and the fifth has 3 possible variations. Multiply them together, and you get a total of 12 possible combinations. The augmented and diminished thirds aren't used very often, where different interval names represent the same distance. A diminished third is the same as a major second, so we can replace the diminished third with a major second. An augmented third is the same as a perfect fourth, so we replace the augmented third with a perfect fourth. Each of these possibilities has its own name. We now have 12 possibilities in total. Don't be overwhelmed by all the chord names you see. I believe the names themselves aren't the most important thing. What really matters is learning to work backwards from the chord name to the intervals. In other words, given a chord name, you should be able to figure out which notes it contains. What I want is for you to see a chord name and immediately know its intervals. And then, by adding the root note, instantly get the notes that make up the chord. Let's work backwards together to figure out the notes that make up a chord. Here, we'll use C as the root note for all our examples. Major triad. This is the first chord we learned. The M stands for a major third. Since we haven't specified anything about the fifth, we use the default a perfect fifth. This chord is very common, so we'll mark it in green. This chord is called aug because it has an augmented fifth. The third isn't explicitly written, so we use the default, which is a major third. This chord is also fairly common. Major flat 5 chord. Its name is simple and direct. The M stands for a major third, and the flat 5 tells us the fifth is lowered by a half step. This chord isn't used very often, so let's mark it in red. Minor triad. The M stands for a minor third. The fifth isn't written out, so we assume the default, a perfect fifth. This chord is very common, and we'll definitely be seeing it a lot. This one's easy to recognize. And the number 5 means the fifth is augmented raised by a half step. This chord isn't used very often, so let's mark it accordingly. Diminished triad. This one's a bit trickier. Dim is short for diminished, which refers to the diminished fifth. But what about the third? It's actually a minor third, but from the chord name alone, it's not immediately obvious whether the third is major or minor. Logically, you might think it should be written like this, or maybe like this to clearly show the interval. But we usually don't write it. This chord is used often, and because of that, its structure has become so familiar that people just assume the minor third is default. Sus2 chord. This chord replaces the third with a major second. You can think of it as lowering the third by a whole step. The fifth isn't written out, so again, we assume the default, perfect fifth. This is also a commonly used chord. Sus4 chord. This chord replaces the third with a perfect fourth. You can think of it as a substitute for an augmented third. The fifth isn't written out, so we assume the default perfect fifth. This is also a commonly used chord. We can figure out the fifth in each of these chords. It's already encoded in the chord name. But here's the key point. These chords aren't commonly used in real music. Let's do a quick summary. Uncommon chords have bulky names, but they directly show the interval structure inside, making it easy to understand at a glance. Common chords are less direct, their names include omissions. Uppercase M and lowercase m indicate whether the third is major or minor. Aug and dim indicate whether the fifth is augmented or diminished. Sus2 and the Sus4 mean the third is replaced by the second or fourth. Intervals that aren't shown are assumed to be the default intervals. Plus, there's a consensus rule. In dim chords, the third is understood to be minor by default. One more time. You shouldn't memorize chord names by themselves. Instead, when you see a chord name, use logic to decode the intervals, and then figure out the notes that make up the chord. In the next video, I'll dive into more topics in chord theory. Meanwhile, you can download GenChord from the App Store. This tool lets you directly observe interval changes in chords, and it also serves as a quick chord reference. I hope it helps you with your playing and composing. Your support and encouragement mean a lot to me. I'll keep working hard to make these videos and the app even better. See you next time.